Hello, today I'm going to be taking you along with me for some watercolor exploration because I have put together a little triad of pigments that I have not used before in order to learn more about them, meet some of my self-studying goals at the moment, and to also try out Jackman's art materials watercolors because I haven't tried them before. And two birds, one stone, right? So first up we have cobalt blue. But this is a little bit different from what you might expect when it comes to a cobalt blue, because this is the pigment PB72, which is semi-transparent, non-staining, there we go, very granulating, and it is excellent light fastness according to Jackman's. And this is an interesting one because cobalt blue you typically associate with the pigment PB28, but this is the pigment PB72. There are also other pigments that fall under the cobalt blue name, but the most common one is PB28 typically. Next up, we have perylene violet, and this falls under what you could maybe say is the red of this triad. I would hesitate to actually say that because I didn't put this triad together viewing it as a primary, but you could say that it is if you want to. But this is PV29. It is semi-transparent, semi-staining, non-granulating, and it is excellent light fastness according to Jackman's. And this absolutely blew me away. I absolutely love this colour now after even just a little bit of experimenting with it. It has such a huge value range. I could very easily see myself using this for value studies just on its own. It goes super, super dark valued, but then it also has gorgeous purple tones when you wash it out. And I love mixing earth tones with it, as we will get into in the mixing section of this. Love mixing earth tones with this. This triad kind of came together because of perylene violet. I don't have a perylene violet and I don't have any hues close to it, and in Lana's Discord we have a pigment exploration club, and one of the months uses perylene violet coming up. It's either June or July, uses perylene violet. So I was umming and ahhing over picking it up for the pigment exploration club, and stars aligned and I now ended up having it. The third pigment in this triad, though, is isoindolinone yellow deep. I really struggled to say that word, and I tried my best. This is PY110. It is semi-transparent, so all of these are semi-transparent. This one is semi-staining, non-granulating, and also excellent light fastness according to Jackman's. This is also part of my self-studying plan of the year, and that is to look at some of the areas that I don't have much experience in, either because it's just an area that I've avoided or it's an area that I simply just haven't had much exposure to. And one of those areas is warm yellows. So this is going to be my warm yellow to explore and to further my watercolor experience with. So next up we have 3 circles, and this is on the other side of the same page, and this is where I'm mixing what you could maybe consider the secondaries of this triad. So we're starting off with the green mixes at the top, and this is mixing the PY110 and the PB72 together. And then the second one, the middle circle, is going to be the purples by mixing the perylene violet and the cobalt blue together. And then the final circle is what you could consider the orange mixes, but it actually turns out being brown because violet and yellow, when mixed together, neutralize. But these two don't perfectly neutralize, and they end up making absolutely gorgeous earth tones. I fell in love with the earth tones that this palette produced. Well, palette. Yeah, it's a palette. It's a triad. That this triad ended up producing. I was very surprised by the violets actually as well, because I expected them to be way more muted. They are still muted because the perylene violet is a muted colour, but it does actually produce really gorgeous, quite vivid muted purples. Of course, the purples and the greens have very, very heavy blue granulation because of just how much that cobalt blue granulates. And you'll really see that in the plein air example towards the end of this video. But because the yellow and the violet don't granulate, the earth tones are non-granulating as long as I don't neutralize it further with the blue. So I can get some granulation in my earth tones by bringing in that blue, which again we'll explore in the color mixing section. I wasn't sure where I was going to put this little section in the video, so I'll mention it now while we have a little bit of time free, but the cobalt blue, it was interesting to me to round out this triad because I don't have much experience with cobalt blue in general, even the PB28. I have tried cobalt blue once because I got a little sample tube from Jackson's. So we're looking at Jackman's today, but I did get a tiny sample tube from Jackson's free with an order years ago, and I ended up giving it to a friend because it just wasn't for me. It was okay. It wasn't bad. It just wasn't for me at the time. And cobalt blue is something that I just don't have much experience with, and I've not tried PB72 before. So yeah, I thought that trying a new pigment along with two new pigments would be interesting. So that's why the cobalt blue is in this triad. But we're going to be looking at the color mixes now. And I'm doing it the way that I like to do color mixing charts, which is a gradual color mixing. And this is where I start with one pigment. So in this case, I started with the PY110, the isoindolinone yellow deep, and gradually added more and more of the PB72, so the cobalt blue. And all I do is I just keep adding slightly more PB72, but occasionally I water down the mixes a little bit. So you'll get some mixes that are a lot more darker in value, and then next to them they'll be slightly lighter because they have more water. And that way I get to see a nice range. I get to see a range in the value, and I also get to see a range in the hues. So you'll see that this row starts to go more and more blue as I'm adding more of that PB72. You'll also see that there's a lot more granulation as well. And the granulation is a lot more apparent in practice. As much as I love doing color mixing charts, and they definitely have a use in my practice, I do find that there's nothing really as comparable as just straight up practice. I end up learning a lot more about pigments by actually using them in paintings and sketches and things. So I did learn a lot about the cobalt blue's granulation by doing a plein air study, which I'll show right at the end of the video. But I do really love the greens that these two end up producing. It's a nice range of warm to cool greens that are very muted, very earthy, but they start having like these peaking bits of blue coming out underneath them, which is really interesting, especially in practice. Next up, I'm going to do the purples. So we're starting out with more of the PB72 with a little bit of PB29. So mostly cobalt blue with a little bit of perylene violet. And then I'm adding more and more violet as this row goes on. And occasionally, again, I will water down some of the mixes. So I'm watering down right now the pigment that was just placed down to get a lighter version of it. And that's how I like to have a nice range accessible to me to see what the two pigments are able to produce. Again, you can really see in these mixes the granulation of that cobalt blue. This is, I would say that the granulation of PB72 reminds me a lot of the granulation of the, is it French ultramarine that I have from Schminke? The ultramarine I have from Schminke is very, very granulating. And this reminds me of that, but again, with that slightly more middle blue hue versus ultramarine slightly warmer blue hue. Very comparable though in the extreme granulation. Again though, love the purples, very interesting purples, very heavy blue granulation coming forth in them. Next we have the mixes between PY110 and the PV29, starting out mainly with the isoindolinone yellow deep. I'm going to get better at it the more I say it, and gradually adding the perylene violet into it, and again occasionally watering those mixtures down a little bit. And this is by far my favorite mixes of this triad are the earth tones, and I'm able to produce some not quite yellow ochre and raw sienna tones, but around that kind of area. I'm able to produce some yellow earths, some orange earths, and then I can go really, really deep with the earth tones as well to produce some like burnt siennas, burnt umbers, and then by adding in the cobalt blue, which we'll get onto in the fourth row of mixes, I'm able to start neutralizing that orange down even further and producing some more sort of like umbers and not siennas, sepias. So very interesting earth tone mixes from this, but especially just from the violet and the yellow together. And from this experience, I have ended up learning a new way that I love to mix transparent, non-granulating, well, semi-transparent, non-granulating earth tones. Both of these pigments are semi-transparent, so they'll still work well for, say, my ink illustrations, but I need to actually use them in practice over ink to see how well they do in their level of transparency. That is something that I would like to test out further in the future. But you can see in this row just how much range there is already, and we haven't even started adding in the cobalt blue either. Absolutely gorgeous earth tones. I can definitely see me using some of these to create skin tones. I generally like using quite transparent, again, this is semi-transparent, but quite transparent and non-granulating pigments to create skin tones, and I can definitely see myself using this mixture as a base to create skin tones from and then adjusting it with other colours. So now we're using all three pigments together. So we're using a little bit of one and then adding the other two in various proportions. And this is mainly to produce, again, much more neutralized earth tones and to also see what grays I can produce as well. Now, with these earth tones and with the grays, I do get that heavy separation of blue. So they're not perfectly mixed grays. There is a lot of texture to them that's not mixed, smooth. They're not perfectly smooth grays. There is a lot of texture to them and a lot of color vibration going on in them with that blue separating out as heavily as it does. In order to give you an example of just how heavily it separates out in practice, after doing these 4 rows, I ended up doing the one of the gray mixes underneath this final row as a big wash, and you can see just how much the cobalt blue ends up separating out and grouping up even on its own. And you'll see that mix at the bottom of this page now, and the blue granulation that you see is entirely the cobalt blue just doing its own thing naturally. I didn't go back and put any cobalt blue into the wash, it just naturally separated out like that. And you can see that even more in practice on the plein sketch that I did, which I shall show you now. I actually did this sketch first before I did any colour mixing, so I decided to go in by diving into deep water with this triad. I went to a location outside and I did the sketch from life on location, focusing on trying to be quite fast and therefore also quite loose. So focusing on mainly using my brush to draw essentially, and that enabled me to then focus on capturing as much as I could in as little time as possible and to really, really study And this, I really wanted to capture the ivy growing from the grave and then over the grass and then growing up the tree. I really loved the blanket between the two that the ivy created. And I felt like I was able to get a nice range of light spring greens and also the deep green of the ivy. Still with, again, with that very intense granulation going on from the cobalt blue. I also really loved the earth tones I was able to produce in practice. I especially loved the sort of like violet umber I was able to get. So all in all, very interesting experience so far. I'm very excited to continue studying and learning with these pigments. Thank you for joining along with me today. I hope that you're having a lovely time, and I will see you next time. Bye!